It was a sunlit afternoon in San Diego, the kind that seemed to promise peace and simplicity. Barron Trump, now a composed and confident young man in his late teens, decided to step out for lunch after a productive morning spent reading. He made his way to CL Bistro, a celebrated restaurant renowned for its elegant ambiance and gourmet offerings. It was the sort of place where San Diego's elite gathered, their laughter and conversation blending into the soft melodies of the Sunset Ensemble performing nearby. Barron entered the restaurant, his presence striking yet understated. What caught the most attention, however, wasn't his stature or the quiet confidence he exuded, but the bold red freedom cap perched on his head. He wore it casually, not as a provocation, but as an emblem of self-expression, a small but meaningful part of who he was. As the glass doors closed behind him, he was greeted by the polished hostess who led him to a table near the window. The view overlooked Seaview Park, its verdant expanse a perfect backdrop for a tranquil lunch. The restaurant was moderately busy, with diners engrossed in hushed conversations. Barron picked up the menu and began scanning the dishes, his mind already envisioning the flavors. Yet, what should have been a quiet moment was soon interrupted by hushed whispers and curious glances. A couple at a nearby table exchanged knowing looks. Two staff members at the bar leaned toward each other, their eyes darting toward Barron. It didn't take long for the unease to materialize. Oliver Grant, the manager of CL Bistro, emerged from behind the counter. Dressed impeccably in a tailored suit, his expression was stern, his steps brisk as he approached Barron's table. "Excuse me," Oliver began, his voice carrying just enough volume to attract attention. "But we have a strict policy against political apparel in this establishment. I'm going to have to ask you to remove the hat." Barron looked up, his calm gaze meeting Oliver's. He placed the menu down, removing his earbuds with deliberate composure. "I wasn't aware of such a policy," he replied, his tone respectful but firm. "Is it posted somewhere?" Oliver gestured vaguely toward the entrance. "It's part of our code of conduct. We strive to maintain a neutral space for all our guests." Barron's lips curled into a faint smile, though his eyes remained steady. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm just here to enjoy lunch." Oliver's stance stiffened. "I'm afraid I must insist. Either the hat comes off, or I'll have to ask you to leave." The room seemed to hold its breath. Barron's fingers brushed against the brim of his cap, but instead of removing it, he stood, towering slightly over Oliver. "If that's how you feel," he said evenly, "then I'll leave." The quiet murmurs of diners filled the void as Barron gathered his belongings and walked out, his steps measured and unhurried. The glass doors whispered shut behind him, but the tension he left in his wake lingered, thick and unspoken. Inside, some diners glanced at each other, their expressions a mix of discomfort and curiosity. A waiter approached Oliver cautiously. "Are you sure that was the right move?" he asked. "That's Barron Trump." Oliver waved him off, though his confidence faltered slightly. "Rules are rules," he muttered. "Exceptions send the wrong message. This is my restaurant, and I stand by my decisions." Outside, Barron paused, letting the gentle coastal breeze wash over him. He adjusted his freedom cap as if to reaffirm his choice, his thoughts churning. He wasn't angry. Frustration nipped at him, but more than anything, he felt a pang of disappointment. Principles of kindness and open-mindedness had been instilled in him from a young age, and this encounter felt like a betrayal of those values. He strolled toward Seaview Park, finding a bench beneath the shade of a sprawling oak tree. Pulling out his phone, he began typing, first a message to his mother, then to a few close friends. He didn't seek sympathy, but rather clarity. a sounding board to ensure he hadn't overreacted. Replies came quickly. "That's unbelievable. You handled it better than I would have." They were way out of line. "You did the right thing. Keep your head up." Barron's thumb hovered over the screen as an idea began to form. He wasn't interested in retaliation or public shaming. Instead, he saw an opportunity to turn a moment of conflict into something constructive, something that could foster dialogue and understanding. With a spark of determination, he made a call. "Hi, I need your help with something," he said, his voice steady but purposeful. Little did Oliver or the patrons of CL Bistro know, Barron's quiet departure was not an end. It was the beginning of something transformative. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting San Diego in hues of amber and gold, Barron Trump sat at his desk, a notebook open in front of him. The events at CL Bistro replayed in his mind not with anger, but with a determination to turn the negativity into a force for good. His pen moved swiftly across the page, sketching out the outline of an idea that had been simmering since he left the restaurant. Barron wasn't one to seek attention, but he couldn't ignore the principle at stake. How could a moment like this be used to foster understanding rather than deepen division? He scribbled a title at the top of the page: "Together We Thrive, Building Bridges in San Diego." The vision became clearer with every passing moment. He imagined a community event, a vibrant, inclusive fundraiser held in front of CL Bistro. The purpose? To support local charities that championed unity, mentorship, and dialogue. A space where people from all walks of life could come together, not just to raise money, but to find common ground. Barron picked up his phone and dialed a friend, someone with experience in event planning. "Hey, I need your help," he began, his voice steady but laced with urgency. As he explained his idea, the excitement on the other end of the line was palpable. "Let's make it happen," they said. Meanwhile, back at CL Bistro, the aftermath of the earlier incident was already unfolding. Social media was ablaze with whispers of what had happened. Diners had snapped photos and posted about the encounter, their captions sparking a wave of online reactions. They asked Barron Trump to leave because of a hat? That's not neutral, it's divisive. Freedom of expression clearly isn't on the menu at CL Bistro. Good for Barron for handling it with class. Oliver Grant, the restaurant's manager, sat in his office scrolling through the growing storm of comments. His initial confidence in his decision began to waver as he read the critiques. "Is this what we stand for?" one user had written. The words lingered in his mind longer than he wanted to admit. Out on the restaurant floor, the mood was subdued. Staff whispered among themselves, the buzz of earlier service replaced by a heavy silence. One waiter hesitated before approaching Oliver. "You might want to see this," he said, handing over his phone. A local news outlet had picked up the story. The headline read, "Controversy at CL Bistro. Barron Trump turned away over Freedom Cap." The article quoted witnesses and highlighted the growing online backlash. Oliver's jaw tightened, but he forced himself to remain composed. "Let them talk," he muttered, though the unease in his voice betrayed him. Barron's plan, however, was already in motion. By the next morning, his team had secured permits for a public event to take place directly in front of CL Bistro. Volunteers began to mobilize, and local businesses offered their support. The event's centerpiece was a large banner that read, "Together We Thrive, Building Bridges, Not Walls." Around it, booths were set up for local charities, gourmet stalls, and creativity corners, where children could paint murals and families could share stories. The Sunset Ensemble was booked to provide live music, adding to the atmosphere of warmth and connection. Barron stood amidst the bustling preparations, his calm demeanor belying the whirlwind of activity around him. A close friend approached him, clipboard in hand. "You sure about this location?" they asked, gesturing toward the restaurant. "It's bold." Barron nodded. "That's the point," he said. "This isn't about retaliation. It's about showing that even in conflict, there's an opportunity to unite." By midday, the fundraiser was in full swing. The crowd that gathered was diverse: families, activists, young professionals, and even a few faces Barron recognized from the restaurant the day before. People approached him to shake his hand, share their support, and express gratitude for turning an unpleasant incident into something meaningful. Barron took the stage, his voice steady but resonant. "Yesterday, I faced a situation that could have divided us further," he began. "But instead of focusing on what separates us, I wanted to create a space that brings us together. This isn't about me, and it's not about them. It's about all of us, finding ways to listen, to understand, and to connect. Thank you for being here and showing that unity is stronger than division." The applause that followed was heartfelt, rippling through the crowd like a wave of shared purpose. Barron stepped off the stage, shaking hands and engaging with attendees, his actions reinforcing the sincerity of his words. Inside CL Bistro, Oliver stood at the window, watching the event unfold. The lively music and laughter outside contrasted starkly with the quiet dining room behind him. He hadn't expected Barron to respond like this, and it left him conflicted. "Maybe you should go out there," a waiter suggested hesitantly. Oliver shook his head. "This isn't my fight." "Maybe not," the waiter replied, "but it's your chance." Oliver didn't respond, but the words lingered. As he watched the growing crowd outside, something in him shifted. A realization he wasn't ready to face just yet. The stage was set, but the real story was just beginning. Little did Oliver know, the next few hours would challenge everything he thought he knew about leadership, community, and himself. The warm coastal breeze swept through Seaview Park, rustling the leaves of the towering oak trees. Barron sat quietly on a wooden bench, his freedom cap still firmly on his head. His phone buzzed incessantly with notifications, a mix of supportive messages from friends and strangers who had already caught wind of what had happened at CL Bistro. Some posts had gone viral, with blurry photos of the incident and captions like "Barron Trump asked to leave over a hat" or "CL Bistro, neutral or divisive." Yet Barron wasn't glued to his screen. He was deep in thought, contemplating his next move. Barron wasn't someone who believed in retaliating through anger or confrontation. He had been raised to value kindness, even in the face of adversity. His father's often polarizing public image had taught him the importance of finding his own voice, one that could bridge divides rather than deepen them. This moment at the restaurant, however disappointing, presented an opportunity to turn negativity into something meaningful. The question was how. As he leaned back against the bench, watching families picnic and joggers pass by, an idea began to crystallize in his mind. The thought of hosting an event, a gathering that celebrated inclusivity, understanding, and dialogue, grew stronger with every passing moment. If the restaurant wished to avoid political symbols, perhaps he could show them, and others, what true unity looked like. Barron pulled out his phone and made a call. "Hey, I need your advice," he said, speaking to a trusted family friend known for organizing charitable events. "I want to host a fundraiser, something that brings people together and highlights the importance of community. And I want it to happen right outside CL Bistro." The friend was silent for a moment. likely processing the audacity and brilliance of the idea. "That's bold," they finally said, "but it's also brilliant. Let's make it happen." Over the next several hours, Barron set to work. He reached out to local organizations known for supporting community-building initiatives. He contacted youth mentorship programs, charities that promoted dialogue and understanding, and even art collectives that fostered creativity as a tool for connection. Each call, each conversation, further fueled his determination. His plan was ambitious: transform the space outside CL Bistro into a vibrant hub of activity. Food stalls offering diverse cuisines would line the sidewalk, local musicians would perform, and booths showcasing charities and community initiatives would encourage participation and donations. Above all, the event would carry a single, powerful message: together, we thrive. By the time the sun set, Barron had secured commitments from several organizations, musicians, and volunteers. A local event planner offered their services pro bono after hearing about the incident. "I believe in what you're doing," they told him. "Count me in." Meanwhile, back at CL Bistro, the atmosphere had shifted. The restaurant's usually bustling evening crowd was thinner than usual, the tables less occupied. Oliver Grant, the manager, scrolled through his phone, reading the comments flooding their social media pages. The backlash was palpable. Messages ranged from outright anger to calls for boycotts. One post read, "Exclusivity doesn't mean exclusion. Shame on you, CL Bistro." Another said, "Kicking out a young man for wearing a hat? That's not neutrality. That's prejudice." Oliver's confident facade began to crack as he realized the ripple effect of his actions. "Do you think he'll retaliate?" one waiter asked cautiously, setting down a tray of untouched drinks. "He doesn't seem like the type," Oliver replied, though his voice lacked conviction. Still, the uneasy silence among the staff spoke volumes. The day's events had shaken everyone, leaving an unspoken question lingering in the air. Did we go too far? While Oliver wrestled with regret, Barron finalized the details for his event. He drafted a message to post on his social media accounts, explaining his intentions. "Yesterday, I was asked to leave a restaurant for wearing something that expressed my beliefs. That's okay. We all have policies and boundaries we believe in. But instead of focusing on division, I want to focus on unity. Join me this Saturday outside CL Bistro for an event celebrating community, understanding, and the power of dialogue. Let's build bridges, not walls. Together, we thrive." He hit post, and within minutes, the announcement began gaining traction. Messages of support poured in, with many people pledging to attend. Influencers shared the post, and even a few local news outlets picked it up. Barron felt a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about what had happened to him, it was about sending a broader message to everyone who had ever felt judged or excluded. The days leading up to the event were a whirlwind. Volunteers arrived in droves, offering to help set up booths, coordinate with food vendors, and manage logistics. Donations started pouring in, from monetary contributions to supplies for the charity stations. The buzz surrounding the event was palpable, and it seemed as though the entire city was rallying behind Barron's vision. Yet, amidst the flurry of activity, Barron remained grounded. On the eve of the event, he returned to Seaview Park, sitting once again on the same bench where his idea had been born. This time, though, he wasn't alone. His closest friends had joined him, offering their unwavering support. "You're doing something incredible," one friend said, breaking the silence. "Most people would have just walked away from this and let it blow over, but you're turning it into something bigger." Barron smiled faintly, looking out at the park's twinkling lights. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about showing that even when we disagree, we can still come together. We can still find common ground." The next morning, the transformation outside CL Bistro began. Trucks arrived with equipment, volunteers set up tables and banners, and a small stage was constructed. The banner stretched across the entrance read in bold, vibrant letters, "Together, we thrive." As the sun rose over San Diego, the street outside CL Bistro transformed into a hive of activity. Volunteers bustled about, setting up tables laden with brochures from local charities, arranging baskets for donations, and decorating the stage with fresh flowers and banners. The phrase, "Together, we thrive," gleamed in bold letters above the stage, a stark contrast to the tension that had unfolded days earlier. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and pastries from the gourmet stalls mingled with the salty ocean breeze. Musicians from the Sunset Ensemble began tuning their instruments, their melodies providing a gentle prelude to the event. Artists set up creativity corners where children and adults could paint, draw, or simply express themselves. It was more than a fundraiser. It was a celebration of community. By mid-morning, the street was bustling with energy. Families strolled past the booths, chatting with representatives from youth mentorship programs and dialogue initiatives. A group of teenagers worked together on a large mural, their brushstrokes blending into a vibrant depiction of unity and togetherness. Donation boxes began to fill rapidly, and the volunteers managing them exchanged astonished glances. Barron arrived quietly, his freedom cap now a symbol of resilience rather than division. He moved through the crowd, greeting attendees and thanking volunteers. His demeanor was calm but purposeful, his presence commanding respect. People approached him, some hesitant, others eager, to share their stories or simply offer words of encouragement. "Thank you for doing this," a young woman said, clutching her toddler's hand. "It's inspiring to see someone turn something so negative into something so beautiful." Barron nodded, his voice steady. "We all have the power to make change," he replied. "Sometimes it just starts with listening." Inside CL Bistro, the atmosphere was far less vibrant. Oliver Grant sat at the bar, sipping his coffee and watching the scene unfold through the glass doors. His staff moved about silently, their usual chatter replaced by an uneasy quiet. The once coveted tables remained mostly empty, and the dining room lacked its usual hum of conversation. "Looks like quite the turnout," a waiter commented cautiously, placing a tray of unused glasses on the counter. Oliver didn't respond immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the bustling event outside. The vibrant energy, the genuine smiles. It was everything his decision had inadvertently opposed. He sighed, setting down his coffee. "I think I made a mistake," he admitted quietly. The waiter hesitated. "It's not too late to make things right," they offered. Oliver's brow furrowed. Could he fix this? Was there a way to undo the damage he had caused, not just to his restaurant's reputation, but to the principles he once believed in? As the music outside grew louder, his resolve hardened. Standing abruptly, he straightened his tie and headed for the door. The sight of Oliver stepping onto the street caused a ripple through the crowd. Conversations paused, heads turned, and even the musicians faltered for a moment before continuing their performance. Barron, who had been speaking with a group of volunteers, noticed the shift and turned to see Oliver approaching. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the bustling street seemed to still. Oliver reached out his hand. "Mr. Trump," he began, his voice measured but sincere, "I owe you an apology." Barron tilted his head slightly, studying the man before him. He could see the tension in Oliver's posture, the effort it took to step outside and face him. Taking a deep breath, Barron extended his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. The crowd watched intently as the two men shook hands, their interaction a poignant reminder of the event's core message. Oliver hesitated, then gestured toward the stage. "Could we talk?" he asked. Barron nodded, leading him to a quieter corner near the edge of the event. The crowd parted respectfully, giving them space. Oliver took a moment to gather his thoughts before speaking. "I made a mistake," he admitted, his tone heavy with regret. "I thought I was protecting my business, but I realize now that I let fear dictate my actions. I judged you unfairly, and I'm sorry." Barron listened intently, his expression calm but thoughtful. "It takes courage to admit when you're wrong," he replied. "Thank you for coming out here today." Oliver exhaled, relief softening his features. "Watching what you've done here, it's humbling. You could have turned this into a public attack, but instead, you created something meaningful. That's rare." Barron smiled faintly. "I don't think the world needs more anger. It needs moments like this, where we come together, even after a disagreement." Oliver nodded, his gaze drifting to the crowd. "How can I help?" "I want to contribute." Barron considered the question before responding. "You could start by hosting your own event. Use your restaurant as a platform to bring people together, to foster dialogue and understanding. Policies are important, but they should never come at the expense of kindness." Oliver's eyes widened slightly, clearly taken aback by the suggestion. But as he looked around, seeing the joy and unity Barron had inspired, a small smile tugged at his lips. "I think we can make that happen," he said. The two men shook hands once more, this time with genuine warmth. The crowd, sensing the resolution, erupted into applause. The music swelled, and the energy of the event reached its peak. Barron stepped onto the stage, addressing the crowd one final time. His voice carried a blend of humility and conviction. "Today isn't about me," he began. "It's about us. It's about showing that even when we disagree, we can find common ground. Thank you for proving that unity isn't just possible. It's necessary." The crowd roared with approval, their applause echoing through the streets. Oliver stood among them, clapping alongside the volunteers, attendees, and even his own staff, who had ventured out to join the event. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over San Diego, Barron stood at the edge of the stage, watching the crowd disperse. His heart swelled with gratitude, not just for the success of the event, but for the reminder that even the smallest acts of understanding could create ripples of change. As the last notes of the Sunset Ensemble's music faded into the warm twilight, the energy on the street outside Ciel Bistro remained electric. Families lingered near the creativity corners, admiring the colorful murals that children and adults had painted together, each stroke a testament to unity. The charity stations overflowed with contributions, their attendants exchanging astonished smiles. It was clear this event had far exceeded expectations, not just in attendance, but in impact. Barron moved through the crowd with a calm demeanor, shaking hands, listening to stories, and posing for the occasional selfie. He was everywhere, and yet his presence felt personal to each interaction. His freedom cap, once the catalyst for a divisive moment, now seemed like a beacon of resilience and hope. Inside Ciel Bistro, the once quiet dining room was now completely empty. The staff, drawn by the vibrant energy of the event, had stepped outside, their curiosity overpowering their apprehension. Oliver Grant stood at the restaurant's entrance, his arms crossed, watching as Barron engaged with the crowd. "He's really something," one of the waiters remarked, stepping up beside Oliver. Oliver nodded silently. He couldn't deny it anymore. He had misjudged Barron. The young man's ability to transform an act of exclusion into a celebration of unity wasn't just impressive, it was inspiring. "I've been in this business for years," Oliver finally said, his voice low. "I thought I understood people. But today, I've learned more about character than I have in a lifetime." The waiter smiled faintly. "You've got a chance to be part of something bigger. Don't let it slip by." Oliver's gaze returned to Barron, who was now speaking to an elderly woman holding a small child. The sincerity in Barron's posture and the warmth in his expression made Oliver's decision for him. With a deep breath, Oliver stepped down from the restaurant's entrance and walked toward Barron. The crowd noticed and began to murmur. Heads turned as Oliver approached, and a quiet tension rippled through the air. Barron saw him coming and paused, his expression neutral but inviting. When Oliver reached him, the two men exchanged a brief nod before Oliver extended his hand. "Mr. Trump," Oliver began, his voice steady but tinged with humility, "I came to thank you. Not just for what you've done today, but for how you've handled everything. I didn't give you the respect you deserved. And for that, I'm sorry." Barron took Oliver's hand, shaking it firmly. "It takes strength to admit when you're wrong," he replied. "Thank you for saying that." The murmurs in the crowd softened into silence as the two men stood together, their handshake lingering in a moment of mutual understanding. Oliver turned to address the onlookers, his voice carrying a hint of vulnerability. "I made a mistake," he said. "I let my own fears and assumptions cloud my judgment. But seeing this today, it's reminded me of what really matters, bringing people together, not driving them apart." The crowd erupted into applause, their approval resounding through the streets. Oliver stepped back, letting Barron take the stage once more. Barron's voice was steady but impassioned as he addressed the crowd. "Today is proof that even when we falter, we can still grow. We all make mistakes. What matters is how we choose to move forward. Let's take this moment as a reminder that unity isn't just an idea. It's a responsibility. Thank you for standing with me. And more importantly, thank you for standing together." The applause swelled, filling the street with hope and energy. Volunteers, attendees, and even members of the Ciel Bistro staff joined in, their clapping a symphony of shared purpose. As the event began to wind down, Oliver approached Barron one last time. "You mentioned earlier about hosting an event here at Ciel Bistro," Oliver said. "Let's do it. A regular series, maybe. Something that fosters dialogue and community." Barron smiled, his eyes lighting up with appreciation. "I'd like that," he said simply. With the crowd beginning to disperse, Barron lingered near the stage, watching as people packed up murals, folded banners, and exchanged heartfelt goodbyes. The transformation of the space both physically and emotionally was undeniable. What had started as a moment of division had blossomed into a movement of unity. A young girl approached Barron, clutching a small painting she had made at one of the creativity corners. "This is for you," she said shyly, handing him the colorful artwork that read, "Together, we thrive," in bold, wobbly letters. Barron knelt to accept the gift, his smile soft but genuine. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but sincere. "I'll treasure this." As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the city in a golden glow, the impact of the day lingered. Barron's event had become more than just a fundraiser. It was a call to action, a reminder that unity could triumph over division when people chose to meet one another with kindness and understanding. Back at CL Bistro, Oliver watched the last of the crowd leave, the street returning to its usual quiet hum. He felt a sense of hope he hadn't known he needed. For the first time in a long time, he believed in the possibility of change not just for his restaurant, but for himself. As the last rays of the sun dipped below the horizon, the street outside Ciel Bistro was bathed in a golden glow. The crowd had dwindled, but the energy lingered, a palpable warmth that seemed to embrace everyone who had been part of the day's transformation. Barron Trump stood by the stage, his freedom cap resting in his hands as he gazed at the vibrant scene around him. Families laughed, children clutched balloons, and strangers exchanged smiles as if they had known each other for years. In the middle of the sidewalk, Oliver Grant stood quietly, taking it all in. The man who had once sparked division now watched the unity unfolding before him, his heart heavy with the weight of his mistakes, but lightened by the promise of redemption. He approached Barron one final time, his steps purposeful, but tentative. "Barron," Oliver began, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "I want to thank you again, for everything. You didn't just change how I see my business. You've changed how I see the world." Barron turned, his expression kind but introspective. "It's not about me," he replied. "It's about what we all learned today. Mistakes don't define us. What we do after them does." Oliver nodded, his eyes glistening. "You've given me the chance to make things right, and I promise I won't waste it." As they shook hands, the applause erupted once more from the lingering crowd. It wasn't just for Barron or Oliver. It was for the shared experience that had brought them all together. The applause wasn't just noise. It was a collective acknowledgement of how far they had come. Barron took the stage one last time. The chatter faded, and the crowd fell silent, their eyes fixed on the young man who had shown them that even in the face of division, unity was possible. "This started with a moment of judgment," Barron began, his voice steady but laden with emotion. "But it became so much more. Today, we proved that even when we falter, we can choose to rise together. We showed that kindness, understanding, and dialogue can build bridges stronger than any divide." He paused, scanning the crowd, his gaze landing on familiar faces. The young girl who had given him her painting, the elderly couple who had shared their story, and Oliver, standing among his staff, visibly moved. "My hope is that what happened here today isn't just a memory, but a catalyst," Barron continued. "A catalyst for more conversations, more understanding, and more moments where we choose to see the humanity in one another. Because, when we stand together, we thrive." The crowd's applause was deafening, a wave of emotion that washed over Barron as he stepped off the stage. People approached him, shaking his hand, sharing their gratitude, and pledging to carry the day's lessons forward. It was clear this wasn't just an event. It was the beginning of a movement. As the evening wore on, Barron found himself back at Seaview Park, seated on the same bench where the idea had first taken root. The painting from the young girl rested on his lap, its vibrant colors catching the faint light of the lampposts. He ran his fingers over the words, "Together, we thrive," reflecting on how one moment of exclusion had blossomed into something extraordinary. His phone buzzed with a message from his mother. "I'm proud of you, Barron. Your father and I both are. You've shown the world who you truly are. A leader with heart." Barron smiled softly, his eyes misting. It wasn't about recognition or praise. It was about knowing that he had made a difference, however small, in a world that so often felt fractured. As he rose from the bench, the painting still in his hands, Barron looked out at the city before him. It wasn't perfect. No place ever was, but it held potential, a chance to be better, to grow, and to heal. And in that moment, he knew that his journey was just beginning. Sometimes, The most profound changes start with the simplest acts: a hat, a word, a choice. Barron had made his, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone around him that even in the darkest moments, light could always be found. With a deep breath, Barron walked away, the night wrapping around him like a promise of the brighter days ahead. His cap was back on his head, but this time it wasn't just a symbol. It was a testament to resilience, hope, and the power of one moment to spark a revolution of kindness. And with that, the story ends, not as a conclusion, but as an invitation for all of us to build bridges, to listen, and to thrive together.